You press the brush between your lips, twist it to a fine point, dip it into the glowing paint, and write the number 6, and the paint left on your tongue tastes faintly sweet. You do it again for the next digit, and again for the one after that, more than 2,000 times before the shift is over. Everyone in town calls this the finest job a young woman in Orange, New Jersey could ever hope to land. The year is 1917, and a war across the ocean has made one small object suddenly precious. A watch. A soldier can read inside a pitch-black trench. The numbers that glow in the dark are painted by hand by girls with steady fingers, and the studio pays far more than the mills or the laundries down the road. They call you an artist. The paint even carries a name, Undark, and a single gram of the radium hidden inside it is worth more than a family home. So they hand you a fortune that shines, and you lay it onto paper dials no wider than a coin, earning roughly a penny and a half for each one. Across the country, several thousand young women are taking up the very same brush. The delicate bristles fray after only a few strokes, so on your first morning, the floor manager teaches you the trick that keeps the tip sharp. Lip, dip, paint. You wet the brush on your mouth, draw it to a point, dip into the glow, and set down one clean, luminous stroke. A trace of the paint stays behind on your lips every single time. You ask the woman training you whether the stuff could ever hurt you, and she answers exactly the way the studio has taught the whole floor to answer. That answer never changes. The paint is harmless, the managers insist, and radium is not merely safe, but genuinely good for the body. In 1917, this is not a strange thing to believe. Radium is the miracle of the age. It glows in tonics sold at the corner pharmacy, in face creams, in toothpaste that promises a brighter smile, in bottled water people sip in search of lost youth. A wonder element that famous doctors praise out loud cannot possibly be the thing wrecking your health. How could the miracle of the age be the very thing slowly turning against your own body? So you let the worry go, and you give yourself over to the strangest reward of the work, the fine dust drift into your hair and your skin, and the good dress you came in wearing. And when you walk home through the evening streets, you shine. The dial girls earn a nickname for that eerie light, ghost girls. You start wearing your best clothes to the studio on purpose so that hours later at the dance hall, you will glow brighter than any other girl on the floor. A few of you paint your fingernails to match. A few paint their teeth, chasing one luminous smile that stops a suitor cold. You are barely 20 years old, and you are made of light, and nobody in that shining room has the faintest idea where the light travels once it sinks into the body. Here is the part that shining room never sees. So what is that pretty glow actually doing, hour after hour, sealed inside a living body? Radium does not rest politely on the surface of you, and it does not pass through and leave. Your own body makes a catastrophic mistake. Chemically, radium looks almost exactly like calcium, and your body builds its bones out of calcium. So, your skeleton reaches outward, draws the radium inward, and locks it deep inside the bone, mistaking a slow poison for the raw material of life. There it stays, lodged in the jaw and the spine and the hips, and it decays. Every second, buried in the marrow, it fires off tiny invisible bullets, year upon year, straight into the living tissue pressed against that bone. In the open air, radium is only a faint and lovely glow. Sealed an inch deep, it becomes a gun that keeps on firing and cannot ever be removed. For months, you feel nothing wrong. Then, a young woman named Amelia notices an ache in a back tooth, a small, dull pain that simply refuses to heal. Her dentist pulls the bad tooth. The empty socket refuses to close. Instead, it festers. The rot creeps outward through her jaw, and the bone itself starts to die inside her mouth. When the dentist finally reaches in to examine the damage, her entire lower jaw lifts away in his fingers, taking almost no force. She is not yet 25 years old, and Amelia is only the first. Across the dial studios, the same nightmare arrives in a dozen different shapes. Teeth loosen and drop into women's open hands. One painter steps down from a curb and her leg snaps clean beneath her own weight because the bone underneath has quietly turned hollow. Another Catherine watches her own body waste away as a strange anemia bleeds the color and strength from her frame. Grace Fryer, one of the brightest among them, feels her spine slowly crushing itself, folding her shorter month by month until doctors lock her into a heavy steel brace just so she can sit upright at a table. Their employers watch all of it unfold. One sick woman after another comes to the company asking what is wrong with her, begging for help with the mounting bills, and the company studies the glowing floor it owns and settles on a single careful answer. So did the men who owned that floor simply fail to grasp what their own paint was doing to these women? What the company chooses to say next is something history should never forgive. The company knew. It had known from the beginning. Radium had been burning and killing people since the day it was discovered, decades before the first dial was ever painted. Marie Curie herself carried open sores on her hands from handling the element. That is the precise reason that, inside these very same buildings, the company's own chemists worked the raw radium with thick lead aprons across their bodies and long ivory tongs in their hands, so that not a single speck would ever touch their skin. The men who truly understood radium shielded themselves with every safeguard their money could purchase, and those same men instructed the women a few doors away to roll a loaded brush across their lips 2,000 times a day. When the studio decided that rinsing each brush in a glass of water wasted too much costly paint, it simply removed the water, leaving lip pointing as the one method now available to each painter. None of this was an accident, and none of it was honest ignorance. So once the women began to die, the company did not confess a thing. So how does a company answer a room full of dying women? It is already poisoned. It paid its own experts to publish soothing studies that pronounced the girls perfectly healthy. It pressed hush money on the dying. Its lawyers stalled every case for years, betting openly that the plaintiffs would be in their graves before any verdict landed. And when a woman died regardless, the company saw to it that her cause of death was recorded as syphilis, a disease soaked in shame, so the public would bury its sympathy alongside her coffin. They poisoned these women, and then they worked to convince the world the women had somehow earned their ruin. For 2 long years, Grace Fryer went from one law office to the next, searching for a single attorney brave enough to face the corporation, and for a long stretch, found no one willing. When 5 of the women at last stood as plaintiffs in 1928, 2 were already confined to their beds, and not one of them could lift her arm high enough to swear the oath. They settled with the company that autumn, every plaintiff already dying, each walking away with a modest sum and the very first crack in a wall that would one day become the right of every worker to come home from a job alive. Grace was gone within 5 years, but the glow did not die. Long after the women were lowered into the ground, their buried bones still carried the light they once painted, still firing quietly in the dark. When investigators later opened Amelia's grave, her remains alone fobbed a sealed photographic plate, a portrait taken by a corpse that would not stop shining. 100 years later, a counter swept above those graves still stutters and clicks. They believed they were painting light onto watches for soldiers far away. They were painting it into their own bones, and that glow still has not faded. The wealthiest men in the country were swallowing the same shine on purpose, by the bottleful and paying a small fortune for the privilege,